Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by retired Captain Hank Pouliot. He was on the water for 40 years and has been retired for about 2.5. Hank,
That's right.
thank you very much for joining me.
Good afternoon, Tim.
Yes,
Good to
sir.
be here. Good to be here.
Thank you very much. Well, these all begin the very same way, sir. Please, let's begin. Where were you born?
I was born in Florida here in Valparaiso. My dad was in the Air Force and stationed at Eglin Air Force Base, and my mom and dad met on a blind date, and he met her in Mobile. He went into Mobile with a friend of his, and back in them days, they took bus rides everywhere. And he was with his buddy, and anyway, he met my mom, and 4 months later, they got married and moved to White Point, which is around Rocky Bayou, and so they stayed there until he had to go overseas. He went to Guam and Korea, and my mom moved back to Mobile, where she's from. My dad is actually from Bridgeport, Connecticut. And so anyway, my mom moved me and her, back to Mobile, and we lived with her parents there in Mobile while he was overseas. And so I was raised in Mobile, went through grade school and high school in Mobile at Catholic school, and it was a great experience. I feel blessed to be able to get a great education. I hated that I didn't do more with my life, but I thoroughly enjoyed working on the river and meeting the number of people that I work with, and the different personalities and everything. And it was a great experience for me.
Well, what did your father do in the Air Force?
He was a bomb loader on planes. He loaded the bombs on the jets. That's what he did.
Okay. Did your mother work?
No, she was a homemaker. When my dad came back from the service, he got a job at International Paper Company in Mobile and worked there for like 41 years. And they had 5 children together, and I'm the oldest of 5, 4 boys and 1 girl. And so, we all were very lucky to have what we had growing up, a good education, and so on and so forth. So yeah, my mom, she took care of us. And my dad, he was the breadwinner in the family. Matter of fact, my mom didn't drive till she was like 35. And then when she started driving at 35, then that's about the time I started driving. But anyway, yeah, it was really great. It really was.
Did you attend college?
I went to a trade school. I went to Southwest State Technical College in Mobile and studied to be an electrician. And I did that for a year and a half. And after I left there, actually, while I was going to school, I worked at the shipyard, Alabama Dry Dock. And I did that for a couple of years. And then after I left that, I went to bartending, and which led me to working on the river, actually.
Well, walk me through that process. What did lead you to the river aside from that shipyard?
Well, a buddy of mine came in that I went to high school with that I hadn't seen in a while, and he ordered a beer, and I went and got the beer for him, and he opened his wallet to pay me. He had a wad of cash in there, and I said, "Dude, what are you doing with all that money? Did you go rob a bank?" He goes, "No, I just got paid. It was a Friday." And he said he just got paid, and he cashed his check. And I asked him what he did, and he told me that he worked on the river for Southern Marine. And So I asked him, I said, are they hiring? I was 22 at the time. And so I asked him, I said, are they hiring? And he said, well, I don't know, but I'll give you the number. You can call and see. And so I did. I called the number and talked to a fellow there, Lucian Lott, who is an old riverman himself, worked for several companies like Parker Towing, Southern Marine. And I went and talked to Captain Tommy Blakeney, and Captain Tommy hired me. He told me, what I'd be doing, working in the fleet. And that's what I did. I worked 12 hours a day, 7 days, then off a day, and then 7 nights, and off 7 days after that. And we used to meet boats that would come into the fleet and drop their barges off, like Warrior and Guff boats or Parker boats, or whoever was coming from New Orleans, and we would help them drop their rigging and pick their rigging up. We'd go out and help them build tow, and things like that. And I was really hooked, man. Once I started doing that, I wanted to get on a trip boat. And so I would say about a year after working in the harbor, there was a company that worked in the fleet that had kept their barges there. It was Laprousse Marine. And so I went to one of the boats that was tied up and talked to the captain on one of the boats, and asked if they were looking for a deckhand. And he said, as a matter of fact, we are. So I went to their office, which was actually in the parking lot at Southern Marine, talked to Captain Sonny Hansen, and he hired me to go on a boat called the Blakely. And so I worked for them for like 2.5 to 3 years. And then I went and got my license. And so I paid for my license, and then went back to work because they didn't have an opening at Laprousse in the wheelhouse to train. I went back to Southern Marine and talked to them about a wheelhouse job. And they said, well, if you can talk to one of these, captains that are working in the harbor about training you, and they'll offer to train you, we'll move you into that position. But at the time they had a couple of guys that were training. So, I'm like, okay, so I guess I'm just going to have to wait until it's my turn. And lo and behold, a captain that worked at Laprousse that I decked for called me and said he knew where I could get a job. And it was at Buchanan Lumber in 3 Mile Creek. They had a couple of boats, and they pushed barges up the Alabama, up the Tom Bigby, and the 10 Tom, and they would log up there. And so he said, just tell them I sent you, and because he had tripped with them before. And so I talked to the gentleman there at Buchanan, and they didn't ask me about any experience or anything. And so they hired me on the spot. Actually, they asked me if I knew where I could get a deckhand, and I said, yeah, I think I can. And so they started me out at 105 a day, because back then 115 was the going rate. And we'd work, it was just me and a deckhand. We'd work from sun up to sundown and tie up at night. And the best job I ever had, man. I have to tell you, the first one just knocked it out of the park, But it was an experience because I really didn't have any stick time. And so, learning to push a couple of loads. We had 2 barges and a crane barge. And, we would spot the crane barge and then an empty alongside, and they'd swing the logs into the barges. And we'd go 7 or 8 spots up the river and pick up logs. But it was really a great job, and it lasted about 1.5 years. And the high water came, shut down the logging in the area. And by that time, you know, I was married and had a child. And so I had to seek other employment to pay for school and, you know, and pay the bills and stuff. And so I went to work with Radcliffe Materials, and which was down the south end of Mobile Harbor. I don't know if you're familiar with Radcliffe, but they were around for a number of years. We run the Alabama River, several places where they were dredging. They would dredge rock and gravel, and then we'd go to Louisiana, and we pick up oyster shells, you know, over there. And the funny thing was, I really didn't have any experience going to these places. So I remember my first trip going to Louisiana, and we were going to down the Chaffalay Bay, and we were headed out Mobile Bay, and I got lost in a rainstorm down there, and ended up in Billy Goat Hole, which is down in Dauphin Island. You know, which is like a little channel down Dauphin Island. So I got the captain up, and I said, "Hey, I don't know where I'm at. The radar's blacked out. I can't see anything." And he looked around. He could see the bridge, Dauphin Island Bridge, way back in the back. And he goes, "You need to back this damn thing out. Turn around. There's your bridge back there." And so I did, you know, and that was the start of my career going west, you know. So it was a great career. I was a very lucky and blessed man to work with some really good guys, man. They really helped me out a lot.
Well, before we get too far into your career, we'll jump right back to where you left off at the bridge there. But tell me what your experience was getting on a boat for the first time.
Well, we had a little boat in the harbor at Southern Marine. It was called the Ronnie C. It had a 671 engine in it, single screw. And we took that boat and checked the fleet every day. And we'd meet tows that came in. We'd help them top out and stuff. I was the deckhand. The other guy was the deckhand, but he was operating the boat, you know, because it was small enough you didn't have to have a license. And so I was like, and it had a steering wheel on. I mean, it was one of them you had to turn on a chain, you know. And man, I tell you, I learned some valuable lessons on that thing, man. I know never to do a downstream landing on a single screw, but it was really cool. I'll never forget, you know, helping some of them guys. It was really, that was my first experience on a boat.
So what year would that have been? And can you tell me about deckhand onboarding?
Well, back then, that was in '79, the end of '79. We had, you know, one guy that operated the boat, and the other guy was the deckhand. But when we got to the fleet, we were both out there walking the barges and making sure everything was secured. We did that twice a day. He helped me learn to tie, you know, how to tie lines, how to make an eye in a line, actually how to put an eye in a wire, because we, you know, wired barges in too, you know. I learned how to build tow, you know, in the fleet. Most of them were 6 barge tows. And we worked together. We worked 12-hour shifts.
Well, jumping ahead a little bit, so you get your license and somebody puts you at the sticks. Tell me about that experience the first time in the wheelhouse.
Man, I'm gonna tell you that was it was incredible for me, because the only time I'd ever steered was just actually holding the stick for somebody that had to go to the bathroom. I had very little stick time. So going up the Alabama River, which is mainly what I did with Buchanan, was really tricky. because for one thing, I didn't know the river. I had a river chart and I marked it up as I went. And thankfully, we only went up to like Claiborne Lock, which was only like 80 miles or 85 miles up the Alabama River. That's as far as we went. But we did go up to Tom Bigby, and I had some experiences up to Tom Bigby up there, and is nothing really bad other than losing the wheel when a log came down and we're loading the barge, and a log came down, hit the starboard wheel, and knocked it off. And I'm like, oh hell, man, what now? So I called the office and told them. They're like, what did you hit? I'm like, well, a log. A log came down and hit us. Are you sure you didn't hit that? You know, I like to play the blame game. But anyway, so, and that was right above Alligator Slide, and it was deep up there, man. We even got a couple of spike poles and tried to put them together to see if we could feel. We couldn't even touch bottom where it was, you know. But yeah, man, that was a hell of an experience. They ended up getting another wheel from Mexico because they couldn't find one nearby, and they had one made in Mexico, and put it on, and away we went. You know, so I was off work for about a month then. But that was an experience.
Let's get back to that trip to Louisiana. So you doubled back to the Dauphin Island Bridge, and then kind of, I guess, fill me in from for that trip. Maybe where you really enjoyed running the most, where you spent most of your time, and I guess through the rest of your career, were there other companies along the way?
Several companies. You know, back then, Tim, a lot of guys, you know, they worked at one place and they would finish their career there. I was of the mindset that if I went to a different company, I went different routes, because most of the companies that I worked for, like Warrior and Guff, well, Lapperouse, they ran everywhere. They, you know, on the Gulf Coast. They went to Tuscaloosa. They went up the Alabama River. They went to Milton, Florida on the intercoastal, and went up the Apalachicola too. I learned, you know, running up the Apalachicola up to Bainbridge and Bluntstown. So I got a lot of experience in going with different companies, and I think that was beneficial to me because I didn't want to be stuck in one place. I wanted to go different places. I wanted to venture out and go different places. So when the opportunity came for me to go to work at Magnolia Marine in '95, they, you know, I called them and asked if they were looking for trip people, and they said, yeah, we need somebody to run up the Apalachicola. I said, well, I'm your man. I've got experience up there. So they hired me right then. And I ran up to Bainbridge for Magnolia. And not only Bainbridge, but I learned to run everywhere with Magnolia. I mean, we went up to Arkansas, the Tennessee, the Cumberland, the Illinois, all the way up to St. Paul, Minnesota. I mean, you know, we went everywhere, and I enjoyed that. I really did, because it wasn't the same monotonous place all the time. You know, ran the Ohio, and really had a great career, because when I get off the boat, at the time I was working 30 and 15. And when I get off the boat, you know, there was no telling where, but there was always somebody there with a rental car. The office would fix me up with a flight, and I would fly the nearest airport to Mobile, which is where I was living at the time. And same thing going back. You know, I called the boat the day before. Where do you think you be? Cincinnati, or, you know, wherever. And I would leave Mobile and fly the boat. And so it was a great experience, going all to all these different places. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Are there any places you haven't been out there in the
Well,
river
yeah,
system?
yeah. I've never run the Red River. I've never been up the White River. There are places I haven't been that are navigable, but for the most part, I've seen the southeast part of the country. Uh, you know, I've been all the way up to Montgomery on the Alabama, and just several places, and I'm proud of it too. I one time worked for a company called Winterville Marine, and that's where I got a little heavy tow experience pushing 30 barges with them. And at the time when I left them, they were being bought out, I think it was Ingram had bought them out. And I decided, well, I want to go to a smaller line tow, not a line tow, but a smaller oil tow, because I had some oil tow experience working in Mobile with Midstream Fuel. I worked for them for 8 years. And, I had a run from New Orleans to St. Mark's, pushing gasoline and diesel for 5 years. So, I mean, hey, man, we used to anchor out at Dog Island, wait for the weather to get right before we went out in the Gulf and came back into St. Mark's, So my whole time on the water seemed like it was a learning experience. I never took anything for granted.
Do any especially interesting stories or experiences come to mind from a 40-year career out there?
Well, maybe one or two. I don't know that I want to talk about too many of them, but yeah, it was a very there were times when things got hairy, especially in high water. Knock on wood, never hit any bridges, or any locks for that matter. But have been in some predicaments, riding with others. And so that was part of my experience too. I remember one time we were going from Mobile to New Orleans. We had a loaded barge. It was a box barge. And I'm not going to name the company I was working for, but the boat I was on had one engine running, and the other one we had it tied off. They wanted us to go to New Orleans so they could get that engine worked on, and so we did. It was me and a deckhand, and so the deckhand, when I asked the office, I said, "What are we going to do when I get tired?" "Oh, well, just let the deckhand drive. He's had experience running the boat." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so anyway, I went and laid down, and I told the deckhand, I said, "Look, you see where Cat Island 1 is up there?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Get me up when we get there." And it was about 2.5 hours in between. And so he never got me up. I woke up about 4 hours later. It was dark, and we're sitting on the ground at Merrill Coquille Light, where he had went through the North Channel there. And we're sitting on the ground just spinning a wheel. And it was pretty hairy, man. Pretty hairy. Ended up staying up about 48 hours, and the weather got nasty. Ended up getting milk jugs and tying them off on both ends of the barges because the weather was turning. Had a northerner breakout, and filled the barge up with water. And so this story, I mean, I could go into detail, but it was something. Good.
Well, how did you end up getting off ground on that trip?
Actually, I didn't. The boat was going back and forth and hitting on the barge. I couldn't even get the winch wires tight enough. The weather was so bad. And the deckhand went to break me out. Once I put the milk jugs on each end of the barge, I was going to go run to the Regolese, because I mean, that was the closest place for me to go. I didn't want to run up into the wind and the waves going to Gulfport. I decided I was going to go into the Regolese. Well, so I broke the boat out. When I did, the generator died. And I'm like, oh, hell, what now? I called. So I didn't, let me preface by saying this. There was a little dredge boat that went behind us. You know, the little small dredge tenders? He went behind us, and I called him and I said, hey, Cap, you mind if I follow you into the Regolese? And he goes, sure. So when I backed out and the engine died, or, you know, I called him. I said, hey, man, I done lost power. Can you mind coming around and throwing a line on me and towing me to the rig? And he said, yeah. He made 3 round trips to throw the line. And this was in Thanksgiving, man. It was cold as hell. And so he caught the line, finally caught the line, and drug me to the Regolese. And I called him and I said, hey, I said, if you don't mind, tie me up at the old fuel dock at the intersection of the Industrial Canal right there. It used to be I'm trying to think which fuel company it was, that I can't think of it. But there was a fuel dock. And so sure enough, he did. I mean, I was plumb, man. I was wore out. I'd been up all like 48 hours. And it was a mess. So anyway, to answer your question, the company had contracted a crane barge and an empty barge and sent it out there and light loaded the barge to get it off the ground. That's how they ended up getting the barge off the ground. That was probably the worst incident I've been associated with, I think.
Well, did any of your siblings follow you into the industry?
No. They're like, oh no, man, that's not for me. They just didn't like being away from home. I enjoyed it, you know. I really did. I mean, I had grandparents that, you know, I had a great grandfather was a harbor pilot in New Orleans. So my mom used to tell me stories about him. And I think that kind of piqued my interest into getting into, you know, the river industry.
Well, what was a highlight of your career?
Retiring. When I tell you, the highlight was when Magnolia called and offered me early retirement. I'm like, man, this can't. I was going to retire when I was 66 and 2 months, but you know, that would have been another year later. So so they offered me, gave me a nice package, you know, to retire, because it was, you know, COVID times. And they had like 3 or 4 boats tied up. And they, you know, the manager called me and said, look, we're asking our senior captains if, you know, they would be interested in early retirement. And I'm like, man, I'm all ears. So, you know, they offered me a nice package. I talked to my wife about it and decided, yeah, I'll do that. Sure will. So I haven't worked since, you know, and
Good for you.
it's been nice.
I
It's been
imagine
nice.
so.
Yeah.
Well, one last thing, I guess. I know you have a shrine to the Crimson Tide over there somewhere in that room.
I do. Would you like to see it?
I mean, if I have to, sure.
Okay.
I might
Hold
lose
on.
a bunch of viewers right about now, but
I don't know
yeah.
if can you see all that?
Oh yeah. What prompted you to be such a big fan of that nasty team over there in Alabama?
Well, look here. I got a shrine to my towboat career too. Right up here, I got these safety awards and everything, and pictures of my boat, and and all kind of plaques and stuff that I got from Magnolia. So what was your question? I'm sorry.
What, I mean, I think I know the answer. It's just for comic relief, more or less. But what in the world got you as a fan of the Crimson Tide?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I ain't never been nothing but a winner. So need I say any more?
Whatever. Let's touch. I know I saw a few guitars. Did you get your new Martin? I think it was.
I went the other day to Guitar Center and looked at one, and it was a used HD 28, and I fell in love with it. And I played it, and I told the guy there, I said, if y'all could lower the strings, it may need to straighten the neck out or something, but put some new strings on it. He said, yeah. So they went back there. He said, you got a minute? I said, yeah, however long it takes. So he went back there and he come back and he says, hey, I hate to tell you, but the binding has come loose on the back of the guitar. I went, what? He goes, yeah. So anyway, and I'm still looking. I mean, I'm just looking for the deal. I'd love to get a brand new one, but I'd be happy with a used one.
How long have you been playing guitar?
Since I was about 25, and I'm 68 now. So yeah, I've been playing a while. I played in a couple of little groups, small bands, and just kicking it around. We played in, I know, a couple of bars, but that's been a long time ago. That was way back when. I still enjoy playing, man. I love to play. And you could ask the guys that work with me on the boat, because I always drug my guitar on the boat.
Well, before we wrap this up, do you have anything else you'd like to share about the industry or your career?
No, Tim, I'm very thankful for the blessings that I've had working with the number of guys. And that's the biggest thing that I'd like to make out of my career, is the fact that there are some really good people out there. And I've made a lot of friends in the past, and so I just appreciate the fact people would take their time to help teach me what they knew. And also I did the same for others, being an examiner, designated examiner and stuff. I've trained many people, but I think it's a great industry. I just wish they were a little bit more family friendly. And because there are companies that are, and I've worked for some mom and pop operations in the past, but for the most part, it's a great career. It really is. I enjoyed it.
Well, what issues maybe have you seen as an employee in this industry, and how might you recommend those issues be addressed?
Well, it's hard to replace people. Like if someone dies in your family, it's hard to just call up somebody and say, "Hey, can you catch this boat tomorrow or the next day, or what have you?" But I always thought that's why they had more than one port captain out there, was that if there was an emergency, that guy could step in and work a few days until you could come back. I always thought that's what that was for, but apparently not in my case. That's the only thing that I wish they would do better is, and don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming it on any one company. It's just kind of, that's the way it is in the towboat industry. It's hard to just get somebody to fly to Cincinnati or up to Wood River or wherever you're at to come for a few days. But I think they should be a little more family oriented. That's it. I think
Indeed,
if I could say this too, as a whole, everything has progressed too with electronic charts and stuff. It's taken all the guesswork out of it. Everything has progressed to such a point that, there's no guessing anymore. You know what's going on. You have information right there for you, which is wonderful. It's light years ahead of what it was when I first started out, And so for those things, I'm very appreciative.
and I am appreciative of your time this afternoon, sir. Thanks for being a part of this project.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you. I enjoyed it.
We'll keep in touch. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.